remember at what age it was you stopped caring about how many candles you were blowing out on your birthday cake? And teenagers are another defining moment. You're bombarded with change. You have to get used to a different body, surges in hormones, peer pressure, and then, of course, testing the boundaries for your own independence. Sometimes it seems the next time age comes up in public is at retirement, and when suddenly you may feel old. What about the middle bit of life? Do we only talk about it when we're having a crisis in our 40s? And what about women in the middle phase of life who often make up a significant proportion of our church communities? Are we really talking about the issues they're facing? I'm Vicky Gibbens, and for UCB's Life Issues today, we're joined by Anglican Deacon, writer, teacher and broadcaster Jayne Manfredi, who's written the book Waking the Women: Faith, Menopause and the Meaning of Midlife, and it's published by Canterbury Press. We're going to talk about all three elements, Jayne, but let's start with the meaning of life, because in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it says there's a time to be born and a time to die. And yet again, does it reference the middle phase of life? Why do you think this is?
I think that the idea of a midlife is actually quite a recent phenomenon. I think I've likened it to the teenage phase. There are perhaps similarities, but what I mean by that is that until sort of we got to the 1950s, there was no discernible, clear teenage phase either. You just were this weird sort of not one thing or another. You weren't a child, but you weren't considered an adult either. And then we get to the 1950s, and then we get teenage subculture, and it becomes a very clearly defined life period. And I think that the same sort of thing is happening with midlife. I think midlife's having a bit of a moment. I think people are treating it as more of a distinctive life phase that is different. You aren't young anymore, but you're not old either. So what exactly is it? And when you're in it, you become very aware that something has changed, and you're not quite sure what it is, but you know that something's changed. It's quite indefinable. So that was interesting to me, and that happened to me almost as soon as I hit 40. And I wonder whether that's a real psychological breaker. Definitely.
Not a psychologist back in the 1920s who was saying that this is a dangerous age. And it's interesting what you say there about where we are at as a society now, because, I mean, in the 1840s, life expectancy was only until you were kind of early 40s. So it is it's a relatively new phenomenon for us, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously throughout history, there have been people that have lived longer. But yeah, it's definitely a distinctive life phase. For various reasons, I think, when I think about my grandparents, they were old. Like, they were always just old. They wore the same clothes when they were, they must have only been in their 40s my earliest memories of them. And yet they looked the same. Their hair was the same. Their glasses were the same. They were just old. Whereas I don't think it's like that now. I think people having children later, starting their families later, I think that nudges everything back a little bit later. I think with women in particular, there's lots of women who, particularly in the church, who might have raised their kids and then have teenagers or an empty nest, and then are at this midlife point, and then can start concentrating on their career or life outside the home a bit more. And that obviously makes it more of a exciting life phase. I think that's definitely been my experience, although I've obviously still got children at home, so I've got 4 of them, and then you've got so many, it goes on for longer. But yeah, right, 10 years ago I just did not have the energy to do the mental energy to do the things that I might be wanting to do now. I didn't have the same kind of headspace. I found motherhood so completely absorbing. And obviously not everyone at midlife is a parent, doesn't want to be, has chosen not to be. So I don't want to generalize, but I also can only speak with authority from my own experience. And that's been mine. Yeah.
What about our obsession, though, particularly with youth culture and this idea of perma youth? We want to cream it, inject it, fill it, nip and tuck it. There's a whole anti-aging industry going on, which doesn't really help us deal equally with how our bodies are changing when we get to midlife.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I've got lots of thoughts about it. So I think lately, and there's been a lot of talk about that movie that Demi Moore is in, The Substance. I've not actually seen it because someone told me it's a horror movie, and I'm not
Not for
very good
you.
with, I'm not very good with horror movies. But I think that the general gist is that it's a story about a woman who is trying to hold on to her youth. And I think that's a real theme from when you get to over that breaker, that 40 breaker, you become very aware as a woman that something has changed. You're not we talk a lot about invisibility, and I've talked about that too. It's not exactly invisibility. You are visible, you're just not visible in the same way that you might have been when you were younger. And I think there's a freedom to that I'm leaning into. But when it first starts happening, that can be quite jarring. When you've been raised as a female in this culture in Britain, you are very much raised from very, very young to believe that how you look and being pretty and smiling when you're told is how you seek approval. So you come to think that that's integral to your identity as a woman as you grow up. And that is jarring when you get over 40 and you suddenly think, wow, I'm not I feel like I've lost something, some sort of cachet that I might have had when I was younger. But then that's also good because then you can lean into your other assets, your other God-given gifts that are actually are more than skin deep. And really sort of dig in and find out who you really are. I think, I mean, the anti-aging, it used to be called anti-aging cream, didn't it? You could buy oil of Ulay or oil of Olay, whatever it was called, and
Yeah.
all those sorts of things are called anti-aging. I think they've rebranded it to pro-aging or something like that.
Anti-wrinkle.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't afford to have any work done anyway, even if I wanted to. And I was actually born with a cleft lip, so I've had an awful lot of surgery on my face, on my nose, and on my mouth, in my childhood, teen years, and in when I was a young woman. And the thought of having any more needles in my face for putting fillers or Botox or whatever is just no way, just no way. And I also I can't be bothered. I'm exhausted. The thought of that exhausts me. Trying desperately to to deny what's happening to me, and that's obviously it's everybody's individual choice, but it also isn't a choice because it's very much dependent on economics. So someone like Demi Moore, for example, in that movie, is the representative of this woman who's trying to hold back time and hold on to her youth. But also in very real terms, she is exactly that in real life. She's in her, she's 60 or early 60s and has clearly had a lot of work done. And that, as a woman looking for of my age, looking for role models, it's really hard to find examples of women in the public domain who haven't had anything done, because most have when they're much younger than Demi Moore. So that's really hard. I went through a phase of being desperate to see a normal forehead. And I know it
What's
sounds
one of those?
what's one of those, and thinking this is ludicrous. Why can I not see a face? Why can't I see faces that look like mine? And then it's really, when you don't see that, it's really hard to feel good about your own aging, because you think, oh gosh, no one wants to see it. I can't see it, so there must be something wrong with it. So I find that that's a real challenge, to eschew that vanity, because that's what it is, isn't it? It's vanity, and I'm not, I'm not free from vanity, but I put makeup on to do this Zoom today. So I wish I was free from it. I'm not. But yeah, there's a line that I can't be bothered to cross, frankly.
We are funny though, aren't we? Because we celebrate vintage when it comes to wine and cheese and cars. There is this difference between men and women, which you point out at one point in the book. You very kindly, I'm so grateful that you did this, although I felt I needed to do a bit more research myself, looked into Daniel Craig and turning 50, was it? And
Yes.
I'm so glad you did the research for us. But
Oh, you're welcome.
there's a celebration of him turning that age, and yet you compare it to the reaction from media outlets when it was Kate Moss's turn.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've just seen the same sort of things happening at the moment with David Beckham.
Mm.
So I saw I think it was in the Times, an article, again took one for the team on this, David Beckham in his pants. And the whole tone of it, it's a campaign, I think might be with Hugo Boss or something. I might be completely wrong. I'm not very showbiz. It was a modeling campaign, and yeah, very very nice photographs of David in his smalls, and I just thought, wow, that wouldn't happen if it was a woman. And the whole celebratory tone of it was completely different when Victoria, his wife, was 50 last year. It wasn't that the tone wasn't celebratory. Some of it was. It was all about her achievements, but then the emphasis was on, and how do you feel about aging, Victoria? And she's asked repeatedly about it and her attitude towards it. Whereas men don't seem to be asked in the same way. And, I don't mean to imply that men don't feel insecure about their own aging, because they do, and they have challenges that women don't, perhaps hair loss, for example, that most women don't have that. But the whole tone of it is completely different between men and women. That it is definitely, there is a discomfort towards the aging of women and a distaste for the aging of women that is not there with the aging of men.
And part of your book is to bring a challenge to us and think about the menopause differently to some of the headlines that we also see around this, that actually aging for women, particularly when we get to that middle phase of life, that it is a gift. It's not a debilitation, which so often it is presented to us as.
Yeah, I felt really quite strongly about this. I wanted to write not so much a counter argument, not something that would dismiss in any way the experiences of women who definitely did feel that menopause was a time of debilitation and diminishment. I talked to women who were definitely experiencing that, and for whom it was a time of real trial. So I was clear that I didn't want to dismiss that at all. But I wanted to provide just open up the conversation a bit more to complement that, really, for people who might be like myself. When I started writing it, I was in my early 40s, and I was terrified by some of the things that I was hearing and some of the things I was reading. And I just thought, wow, I'm facing down this thing that's going to be happening to me. I can't run from it. It's happening whether I want it or not. And it sounds horrendous. It sounds awful. And suddenly every ache or pain or sleepless night or digestive issue or all normal body stuff, I was like, wow, is that it? Is that it? Is it perimenopause? Am I is it happening to me now? And this is awful, so therefore it must be perimenopause. And I really wanted to think, well, it might be, it might well be for some women, and is something that is very difficult for them, and something which is a blight, and something which makes their life, at least in the short term, harder. But then it might not be like that for everybody. And I'm very conscious of when you find a one-sided view of something, and there are many different topics where this is the case, and where sort of trying to have a counterpoint in any way is seen as anathema, and you are not allowed. And I knew that menopause was one of those. So that made that made me quite anxious the whole time I was writing it. And in the end, I just thought, it's worth saying. Actually, it's worth saying for the people who want to hear it, and for the people who need to hear it. And I want to hear it. I
Mm.
want to read this. So yeah, that was my initial motivation anyway.
Well, Jayne, let me share just three headlines already this week, preparing for our conversation together. I came across the big menopause swizz. Do hormone supplements really work? In the Daily Mail, there was an article about I cured my menopause rage by taking magic mushrooms at a £5,000 luxury retreat. And one more for you. Working with the menopause, supporting the change in the workplace. It sounds like the menopause has got its own personality, let alone actually dealing with the women going through the menopause in the workplace as well. I mean, just some of the language and the imagery that is attached and what we're experiencing. Again, it's all feeding into this negativity at a time where you actually think it should be a time to embrace, to awaken, to celebrate for women.
I think what we're seeing is the industrialization and the commercialization of menopause. For as long as there have been women, there have been people to tell us what's wrong with us. Because if there's something wrong with you, then you can be sold the cure, can't you? And I think what's happened with menopause, that is definitely something for women to be mindful of. And to engage their critical faculties when looking at content online or wherever, because people are after your money. That's definitely part of it. It's a whole industry now. I saw an advert the other day, because obviously the algorithm is after me. If you put anything, it will be after you too now if you've Googled anything to do with this. It obviously thinks this woman's in her 40s. She obviously needs to be fed stuff about dermal fillers, or in this case, it was shampoo. It was menopausal shampoo, and I just thought, oh, shut up! No, like, stop it. It's so there's that. That's irritating. There's a lot of snake oil being peddled to women as well, different jellies and supplements and laser treatments and all sorts of stuff, and that obviously promotes anxiety as well, doesn't it? And I think one of the other things that, if you are writing about this, talking about it in the public sphere, women have obviously, over the past few years, the conversation has been huge, has taken off in online spaces. So women this has been really great for women on the whole, because it means that they've been able to make connections and build solidarity and feel seen. It's no longer this silent passage that it was once talked of, something that women had to just feel ashamed of, oh, she's going through the change, it's something that was embarrassing that couldn't be discussed. That's gone. That's not happening now. We're talking about it, which is brilliant. But I think one of the things I've encountered is that a lot of women have kind of taken on menopausal or perimenopausal as their identity almost. And if that's your identity, and you have your tribe of people who also share that identity, they feel attacked if you say anything that might contradict, or that they perceive to be contradicting that identity. And that's been a challenge. I knew it would be. But my identity is not Jayne, perimenopausal woman. That's not my identity. As a Christian, my identity is child of God, first and foremost. So my perspective is different.
It is so different, and you gain that because of the way that you've written your book, in between the different chapters, talking about the practicalities of what's happening with the physical symptoms and also what's happening in church life and responses to it. You've woven in this beautiful fictional story which explores a group of women across the ages and this experience of the wilderness as well. Where did that idea come to you?
Oh, well, that idea came from Barbara Brown Taylor. And I'm a real fangirl of hers, actually. She's amazing. And I've read all her books. So for anyone that listens doesn't know, she's an Anglican priest, she still is an Anglican priest, and a really gifted theologian and writer. And I heard her speaking at an event called the Evolving Faith Conference. I heard the podcast of that, and she talks about what she calls subsistence theology. And she talks about moments in our lives when you might go through a period of being diminished and feeling lost. So periods of grief, or a redundancy, or a very a bad an illness, a diagnosis, a painful breakup. So times when you feel lost, you might be without your usual props that you need to survive. You might find yourself in a landscape in a metaphorical landscape where you just don't know where you are anymore. And listening to that, it's really, really excellent. And I thought, oh gosh, menopause could be such a time. It could be such a time. And I was listening to it, and at the same time I was having conversations with other women. And there was one woman in particular who was going through surgical menopause. So she'd had her, due to cancer, she had to have a hysterectomy, and she'd had to have her ovaries removed as well, which plunges you into menopause overnight. And that can be quite fierce. And she was really struggling. So I was taking on all this, and I thought, gosh, I wonder if I could use wilderness as a metaphor for what's happening, for the whole process. And that was when I came up with the idea of the creative strand that runs through the book, and also the idea of a journey, and how we go on that journey with other women, and that other women can be a real resource for us.
I was quite struck how so often it came to the voice of the girl in that wilderness story that seemed to bring the group back together, if you like, and help us understand a little bit more about womanhood, and I guess our childhood experiences, and what changes, looking at some of the research you have done, when we start to go into those teenage years, and perhaps how we lose our voice and our sense of identity.
I mean, I knew this from my own personal experience, that this is something that happens, that you go through puberty. I went through puberty quite early as well, which can be really distressing, because you get body parts, breasts, at a time when you are still very much a child. I was 11 when I started my periods, and then had the burden of being the girl in the class with the biggest boobs, the first one to wear a bra. Every class has this girl, and it was me in my class, and that's so exposing. Literally, you're in year 6, and you're having to still get, we still had to get changed in front of the boys in the classroom, and I can remember a group of us took to sneaking off to the toilets to get changed, and we got into trouble for it because we weren't allowed. Just this confusion, societal confusion of, well, she's 11 or 10 in some cases, she's a child, but has womanly body parts, and they don't quite know what to do with you. And because it's a body part that is the Western world is so obsessed with, it's not something that you can just hide easily. So I remember that time, and feeling so exposed, and then that promotes a real sense of body discomfort. So trying to hide, being covered up all the time, not wanting to wear swimming costumes. And that's before we've even got onto the physical discomforts and issues of periods. At a time at school, before there was always towels and wings and dry weave top sheets, it was just those awful, like massive big sausage things that they were just so impractical and really horrible. And I think loads of us have got stories of bleeding onto our school skirts, not being allowed to go to the toilet, where it's a real it's a real issue and can leave long lasting scars that you might not have processed at all. You just, that's just the way it is. That's the way it was for all the other girls in my class, and that's how it was for me, and that's how it is for my daughters. And it's no, you just sort of accept it. Um, but the weird thing about it is that you kind of assume that um, that when you get to womanhood, that's all done with. But of course, women's bodies don't ever stay the same, and they're in flux. So I wanted to explore that as well, about the idea that women move in cycles instead of in a linear way.
I mean, in the book, you're not trying to help us from kind of a medical point of view. Because of course there are so many symptoms when it comes to the menopause, and this idea that actually for women they have estrogen receptors on every cell in the body, which is why I guess it manifests differently for each and every woman when it comes to the menopause. But you do helpfully try and focus in on a few different symptoms like fever, like rage as well. And we were just reflecting, I guess, on the wilderness story and that idea of the voice of the girl as well. Take us back to thinking about in Jesus's ministry, particularly that story of the girl awakening, because it's quite a profound story reflection that I've never thought of, and it was really helpful to read it through your eyes.
Yes, I was really very, very struck by that story, because that's the only incidence in the whole Bible of that mentions women's, well, not reproductive function, but which talks about menstruation in that way. So we have the story of the bleeding woman, and it's kind of sandwiched with the story of the girl who is being raised from the dead. So I was very influenced by the only things about menopause that I could find when I started researching, because there was just absolutely nothing, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book. And one of the first things I found, one of the only things I found, was a paper given by Reverend Julie Gittos, who's an Anglican priest, and she had given a paper about menopause, and she uses this story. So I definitely knew that I wanted to use that, because that was really important. And obviously, she touches Jesus's cloak, and the bleeding stops. The bleeding stops, and that is menopause, isn't it? That's what menopause means. It means our menses pause. They stop. So Julie reimagines it as, well, what if this is about menopause? And I was like, whoa, I'd never looked at it like that before. She tends to be used as a story of a woman who has a problem. She, in many ways, I don't want to diminish that at all. She obviously does. This is something, this heavy bleeding, this non-stop bleeding that she has, is something which has blighted her life in many ways. But yeah, the idea of it stopping, and that being something that God is involved in, almost, and that's something that can lead to a fuller life after the bleeding stops. That was something that really gripped me. And then the idea of Jesus heals this woman, and he goes from there to a girl, and he raises, she's 12 years old, and there was something in the 12 years as well that I just thought, oh, 12, she's 12, that would be when your bleeding starts. And that's got me thinking about it. And at the same time, I was reading the book, gosh, I can't remember the names now, but Meeting at the Crossroads, the book about the research that had been done into young girls and what happens to young girls as they go through puberty and become adolescents, and how what their research had uncovered was that they lost something of who they were during that time. And it's just heartbreaking. I recommend everyone reads that book, Meeting at the Crossroads. It broke my heart reading it, because I knew that that's what happened to me, and that's what I saw happen to my daughters as well. They're now one's nearly 21 and the other one is 16. And I've seen that happen to them. So how we start out in prepubescence very much like our brothers, our male friends, our classmates, and you all play together and your body is neutral. And then you get the breasts and the periods start. And suddenly you realize that the world doesn't see you in a neutral way anymore. And you're not treated in the same way. And I really wanted to look at those two stories as my opening into the whole thing, to say, wow, maybe if we, not if this hadn't happened to us, because being a woman, I love being a woman. I'm not saying I didn't wish that I hadn't gone through puberty. I'm very glad that obviously I did. But what did I lose when that happened? Who was I before? What compromises have I made to be a woman? Am I as free as a woman as I could be? Is there the potential for me to be freer as I cast off some of these things that have been attached to my womanhood, like the need to be pretty, that need to be polite, to be nice, to be sexy, to be seen as attractive? What if some of those things are just not going to matter anymore? And I frankly, at my age, don't care about being nice either. I don't mean unkind. That's something very different. To nice is a very gendered expectation. And as you get older, you care less about that. And that's very freeing. So that was what I wanted to explore. Who were we before this happened? Who were we? And is it possible that menopause is a process by which we can be awakened to what we might have been before?
You were talking earlier about niceness, and in the book you talk about the importance of rage and anger, and actually how there is a right place for that as well, which sometimes can be one of those controversial things within particularly church communities as well, to have angry women, if you like. But unpack that one a little bit more for us.
I think that expectation to be nice, and to smile when told to, and to bury parts of yourself, and to not have opinions. I mean, just some of the language that gets used, some of the gendered language that gets used. I've yet to hear a man described as strident, for example. Men, if men have opinions and freely share those opinions, they're seen as just very confident, whereas a woman is strident. I've never heard a man called strident. And I think that just one small example is very telling. So I think that pressure and expectation, when you get older, I think a lot of women have just had enough. I think some women just get to a point where they just think, I've had enough of this, and I feel buried under expectations to behave a certain way. I'm tired of putting myself last all the time. I'm tired of being the last one that gets thought of. I'm tired, and I don't want to hold this in any longer. I think that's happening at midlife. And I think also, just not as women are less willing to play the game anymore, play that game of being conciliatory, and laughing when perhaps you should have got angry. And I was thinking about this yesterday, of all the times I've laughed when someone said something to me that was offensive or rude or sexist, and I've laughed out of self-preservation, and out of a need to not make the other person feel uncomfortable. I mean, what's that all about? Like, whereas really I should have said, no, that was out of order. Why did I laugh? Why do we do that? Sometimes it's out of a sense of keeping the status quo. It might be to keep us safe as well, because to challenge, to object, is to be perceived as not nice. And if you're not a nice woman, then that must mean you are a bad woman in some ways. You are a troublemaker, you're difficult, you're strident. And we obviously, most of us don't want to not be liked, and we don't want to cause a bother. And and in church, Christian circles, I think that's far more common as well. We want to be good Christians. And to be a good Christian is to be nice. Except it's not. Except it's not, because I don't see anything in my Bible about Jesus saying, well, just remember, just be nice. So I was very struck that was something I wanted to explore. And also because a lot of the women that I was talking to were telling me how angry they felt. That came up possibly more than anything, that women felt angry about all sorts of things about church hierarchy or about their relationships, anger towards family, or just the world in general. Very angry at feeling marginalized and at putting themselves last, and then getting to 50 and thinking, why did I do that? This didn't, I'm feeling cheated or lied to. And then, putting themselves last, or making concessions, and then getting to 50 and then realizing that, oh, now I'm on the scrap heap. I'm perceived as being on the margins now. A lot of women reported a lot of resentment about all those things. And then I guess hormones are in the mix as well. Hormones can make you feel weird things, irritation.
What about just addressing some of the specific issues that women in middle phases of life are going through? Because so often across different church denominations, you see, this idea that children are the future, and lots of investment in programs and outreach around young people. We also have developing conversation about supporting our aging members of the congregation. Do you hear much around actually directly addressing some of the issues that women in middle life are going through?
I've heard in response to my book now that people are, I don't mean that the whole church is, because Jayne's written a book, this is happening. I mean that's what I've heard personally, people coming to me, just to make that clear. That's what I've heard, that people, I've been asked to speak at a couple of dioceses in the Church of England, invited by middle-aged women who've read the book and who want me to talk to other middle-aged women in that diocese about what's happening. And I've got a couple of more other things throughout the year planned. And that's exactly what I hoped for, because what's happened as a result of that, women are talking about this. And that was my first hope. If nothing else happened, I wanted women to be able to have a space to talk freely without shame with other women about what was happening to them, and have the freedom to share the whole range of possibilities, and just to get to grips with it, as we're not alone. There's so many of us. If we are such a massive demographic in the church. And that was what shocked me when I went to the library at Queen's and looked for a book on menopause, and there wasn't one. And I just thought, how can there not be one? Why is no one talking about this? Why has no one written about this? And happily, people are now. So that's really good. Obviously culture is 5 steps ahead of us on this. But the church is also, it's grasping that nettle as well, and getting on board with it. So even if in a very small way, if I'm just throwing out tiny little mustard seeds, you just don't know what will grow. And what I wanted more than anything else was for women to have a place, have a space where they could go and feel seen and heard, and ponder, what's my relationship with God in at this time? Does God have anything different to say to me at this time? I just wanted women to feel less lost. If that is indeed how they did feel, obviously don't want to generalize, but yeah.
And I guess that can be explored through liturgy. You close the book with some beautiful liturgy and recognizing where, you know, at one point you reference the thanksgiving of women after childbirth within the Church of England, that liturgy, and how there is a place perhaps where there is this gap when it comes to our worship and our liturgy and our understanding of how we are discussing and finding space within the church to explore these issues.
Yeah, I think I was just very struck with once I started thinking about it, about the woman, the bleeding stopping, the girl, the she's 12, the bleeding might be starting, and everything that happens after that. I started to see my own body as a story, and other women's bodies as their own stories as well, and how our body stories matter. They form us very definitely. I did a thought for the day last year about it was about miscarriage, and I started off the thought by saying that sometimes I feel like my body is a graveyard, because I've had life there and life has died there as well. And then I end it by saying that no, it's a memorial. It's and then I thought, gosh, it's all these things. So there's so many different stories contained within it, and I felt like a lot of women feel like that too. And I thought the church really needs to honor that somehow. And liturgy, yeah, there is a liturgy in the book, and I really enjoyed writing it. But there are some really talented liturgists who I hope and I know will get on board with this, and will, they're already writing really beautiful liturgies about women's body stories, and about the things which happen to women and the things which impact upon our faith lives. So that's my hope, and hymns as well. Like, when did you ever read a hymn from the perspective of a woman? It's not very common at all. And I think as women in the church gain more fluency in talking about these things, you will hear it in intercessions and in preaching. Lots of women church leaders have come to me already and said, I preached about this, I talked about this, I raised this in my small Bible group. So that's happening, and at a real grassroots level, and that's really exciting.
I wonder if you feel able, whether you can share a bit about your own healing journey, because that was also one of the reasons why you wanted to write this book. As I understand it, towards the end of the book, you reflect on the traumatic breakdown that you had.
Yeah, I think my book is the best example that I can give of writing as therapy. I mean, I've always written. I've written since I was 8 years old, and my great auntie Amy gave me. She was a legal secretary, and she gave me this giant metal typewriter, and I would sit pounding away in my room on it and writing little books. And I've written. I've forever. I've written. Writing is my favorite thing to do. It's my absolute passion. So writing this book was absolutely a way to try and heal from that, and pouring myself into that rather than in what was happening to me, which was pretty awful. And every time someone comes to me or sends a message to me to say, I've read your book and I cried and I laughed and I felt that I felt that I could feel really excited about this life phase, about what's happening to me, and I feel closer to God after reading this book. That is just such a gift. It's such a gift, and I feel like God called me out of one particular situation that was harmful to me, and called me to something else. And I hope I hope I've lived up to that, and will continue to do so.
Absolutely. Jayne, if we can maybe draw some of these thoughts together as you do in your book, you end in a place around Holy Saturday. And I was really struck how you reflect on Jesus when we think about him on the cross and obviously his wound in his side and it being a mixture of water and blood. And you say, it's not just a fluid of violence or loss, it is also one of regeneration and relief. Why did you want to land on Holy Saturday as you drew your book to a close?
Well, when I was deciding which symptoms of menopause to focus on, there are obviously, if you go online, you will find hundreds. I thought I have to cover the ones which are going to be occur most commonly, and also the ones which women were telling me in conversation that they were experiencing. So that final chapter is where I explored depression, which women may or may not experience during the perimenopause phase. If you have a history of depression, you are more likely to experience it. If you have any of the comorbidities, other ways that you're struggling, you are also more likely to experience it. So that's why it's in there. And I wanted to, when I went to scripture and looked at it and how to explore it, it struck me that idea of Holy Saturday, so the idea that something terrible has happened. In the case of Holy Saturday, Jesus is dead. And I thought, gosh, what was that like for the people on that first Holy Saturday? What was that like for Jesus's mother, who would have been menopausal at that point, by the way? She would have been. And I just thought, what was that like? It's so hard for us to get to grips with that because we know what's coming. We know that Easter Sunday is coming. We know that we know the glorious the glorious thing that happens. We're Easter people. But what if you didn't know? What's that like? What's an eternal Holy Saturday like? And I knew exactly what that was like. That's desolation, that is separation, that is loneliness, that is living in a place of real hopelessness. And it's awful. So I really wanted to explore that idea of what that's like, and trauma. What trauma can be like, how it can feel very much like you've been crucified, and you still have you put the cross down, but you've still got splinters in your hands from the wood, and in some ways you are never going to be free of what's happened to you. And that really was a powerful thought for me, because that's what I was going through at the time. And trauma is very complex and can feel completely hopeless. But yeah, that was what that final chapter was about.
But you remind us that God is with us even in those moments where we feel like that.
Absolutely. And that was also my experience, that while I felt completely forsaken, I knew that God was with me in that dark place in the dark of Holy Saturday. That I knew that I wasn't forgotten by God, and that was the thing that gave me the hope to keep writing, and to put that out into the world. And I do, despite everything, love God so much, and feel that I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for God, and that I just feel so grateful, so grateful that I became a Christian at 33. It's changed my life, and some of that has been terrible, really awful. I wouldn't be traumatized. It's such a strange thing. I wouldn't have been traumatized if I hadn't joined the church. But then I wouldn't know God, and I wouldn't change that.
Jayne, would you pray for those who are listening today? Maybe they are trying to understand what it is like, this phase of life for women in their own families. Perhaps it's an individual going through this very reality at the moment.
Okay. Heavenly Father, we ask you to be with these women in midlife and beyond, that they would know the giftedness of this life stage, that you would be beside them in the good and the bad, that throughout it all they would not despair, that they would see themselves as repositories of new life and flourishing, and that there is life after when the bleeding stops. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Jayne was so open in sharing about her own physical and mental experiences of midlife and her discoveries in the Bible of how God responded to many women experiencing such life transitions. Dissatisfaction and loss at such a time as the menopause can lead to many questions, and that's where the church can help women find acceptance, self-compassion and support, but only when we enable such experiences to be voiced without embarrassment and shame. My thanks to you for listening today, and also to Rachel Gillis, UCB's producer of our Life Issues podcast. Do make sure you subscribe to the series.